How to use Blender. Today we're going to be talking about the Blender Render Engine. So up here you can test, or you can switch between the Blender Render, the Game Engine, and the Cycles Render Engine. Now what that does is it changes a lot of the settings, so where like one would be better for animating and one setup would be better for making video games. This setup would be best for making animations and renderings in the Blender Render Engine. And to be honest, most of the tabs like over here, they don't really change all that much, but the things like the render engine and the textures and materials tabs, those changed quite a bit. So first off, we have the render. Now you can press render and you render an image. You render the scene that's right here. You render it from this camera, from the point of view of that, and it takes into account all the lights. And there's only one light in the scene, so it's pretty simple. It takes a split second to render this. And this is the viewpoint of what you're rendering. You can change that by changing these settings over here. Like for instance, they'll be rendering at 800 by 600. So we can go 1280, get a really wide image, by 720. And now it'll render it at 1280 by 720. And you can actually make it a lower percentage of that. Like for instance, if you're trying to just make a quick test render, you could render it and it'd be very small, a very small and quick output. It wouldn't look very good, but it'd be great for a little test render just to make sure your animations look okay. Let's press F12 to render. You can press render or you can press F12. And now we're rendering at 1280 by 720. That's full 720 HD video. Now let's make an animation so I can show you the animation button. We're at the side view here. Now over here we can see there's frame 1. Oh, I almost forgot. Turn on a screencast so you can see what I'm doing. Like I pressed N, you can see that. Okay, now we're set. So we have the brick here, and it's frame 1. Let's press I, and go to Lock Right Scale. That'll save the location, it'll save the rotation, and it'll save the scale. So let's go to frame 24 now. Move this over here, and rotate it. Now I'll press Lock Right Scale again. So now what we've done is we made 2 keyframes. So we press down arrow. This is the keyframe right here. So at frame 1 it's here. At frame 24 it's over here. Well, if we go to frame 2 and all the way up, it interpolates it in between the 2 frames. So it animates it. You can actually watch it like this. Press Alt A. See? And it showed what we just animated. Unfortunately, we told it to start at frame 1 and we told it to stop at frame 250. And there's really nothing that happens between frame 25 and 250. So let's stop it at 24. Now we go to Alt A, and it keeps looping it. We can go down here and press Animate. Oh, before I forget though, by default it saves them as JPEGs. Well, if you're going to render like a bunch of frames, you don't want to have them as JPEGs. You want to have them as a video you can watch, because otherwise the JPEGs you'd have to load them into another program and stuff like that. But if you save them as an AVI JPEG and keep them at like 90 or so % quality, it'll be a nice sized file that won't take up too much space on your hard drive. You can go to Animate. See, it's animating every frame. Let's go over here, go to Computer, go to C and TMP file. You can change where it saves them, but I always just leave it at the default. There's our animation. It's very fast. It's only 1 second long. Oh, actually no, it wasn't 1 second. Oh, because we only have 24 frames in our animation, but we're running at 25 frames per second. So if we were running at 24, that would have been 1 second, but we're at 25. Like for instance, if you have 60 frames per second, it makes it run very fast because it's going through 60 frames every second. It's very smooth playback though. Now if we could go to Custom and go to 12, and now it's very slow playback, but it's very choppy also. That's not too good. Let's go back to 24. Now as for these other features, we have anti-aliasing, which let's make a test render. Without anti-aliasing, behind each one of these pixels, it weighs what it sees behind there. Like let's take this pixel for instance. It recognizes that, let's say 60% of the space behind it is occupied by the red, and 40% is occupied by the blue. So it decides, well, most is occupied by the red, so I'll just be red. And not much is occupied by the blue, so I won't be blue. but unfortunately that makes a very rigid and hard line that looks very digital and doesn't look very nice. So we can hit anti-aliasing. We can have different resolutions of that. Let's go on the lowest. Now what the pixel does is, instead of just choosing red or blue, it realizes, okay, well, behind my area there's 60% of it's filled up by red and 40% is filled up by blue, so I'll make it a little bit in between there. So I'll make my my color a little bit like a bluish red, so it looks like I'm actually in between there, and that gives it a very nice and rounded look. And one thing, this can be a lifesaver if you're having to do small things like grass or like the leaves on a palm tree, because if you have a lot of thin lines and you don't have anti-aliasing, it can look pretty nasty. But the higher the resolution you go, the better it looks. It looks almost like an old Polaroid photo or whatever. And finally we have motion blur, sample motion blur. Whenever we have an animation with something moving inside of it and it's a very crisp image, it doesn't look very good, because our eyes are used to seeing blurry images. We have this problem with HD TVs, because have you seen some of the new HD TVs with like 120 frames per second? Well, a lot of the problems are that cameras and stuff for like sports games and whatnot, they don't record it as blurry. They record it as super crisp, and that it messes with our eyes, because we're used to judging speed by how blurry something is. So this can help you make something blurry. Like, let's go to frame 24. Let's go to 28 and move it over, way over here. So now, between frame 24 and 28, it's moving pretty fast across here. I'm going to move the camera over to here by pressing Control-Alt-0. Now whenever we render it, makes kind of a blurry image. Doesn't work too good though. You know what, let's go to where it's not moving nearly as fast, okay? Maybe that was moving too fast before. Let's try that. Okay, yeah, see, it's kind of blurry there. And we can go up in samples, and it makes it very blurry there, and it makes a very good resolution. So that looks like it's moving fast. It looks like it's moving. And it only blurs what it needs to blur. Like, we can add a cube. We can add it behind there and render it. And you can see that it blurs what's moving and it doesn't blur what's not moving. So that's pretty good. It blurs what it needs, it doesn't blur what it doesn't need. Well, let's go back to the frame 26 or whatever. And render that. So yeah, that's pretty fast and pretty blurry, but that might be what you want to have for like a cannonball or something going that fast. It's a little bit fast for seeing it though. We can though turn it down to just 2 motion blur samples and see exactly what it's doing. See, you can see 2 distinct images. It renders one image, it renders another image, and that saves those 2 images together. Or actually, I guess for that kind of image you could turn this down to 0.1. Because see, this is like how big of a window it's rendering. Let's say you have like between frame 1 and frame 2, and if you have it at the shutter at full of 1, it'll render a bunch of images between frame 1 and 2 and add those together. Well, if you have a smaller one, that's just like having a quicker camera. So let's try this. I wonder if it'll work. That might. Let's go to 0.2. Okay, that's looking a little more promising. So you can change the amount of blurriness, or how far they blur from each other, by that. Nice. So let's turn this down to 8, and let's turn this up to 28. Let's turn this down to 25 or so, and let's animate. It's going to take a little bit to do. Mostly because it's also taking into account the blurriness of it. So let's go to computer, TMP, Oh wait, no. Not this one. Forgot. It's 28. Darn it. For some reason it doesn't like whenever I go down here. So let's just go to full and try that. Oh, I hit render. This is so annoying. It's almost there. There we go. Now let's try that. See how realistic that looks? Other than the fact that it's a cube floating through the air. But whatever. It looks a little bit better than just being a crisp image. Well, I hope that helps you make things look cooler, and I hope you enjoyed this video. See ya!